Amy, good to see you yesterday. Oh, Amanda too. Hi, Amanda.
Yeah, nice to see you. I'm walking a dog, so I'm multitasking.
Okay. At least you're outside. That's good.
Indeed.
Should we get started to be respectful of folks' time who showed up on time?
Yeah,
Move on
since
to
you know,
an
since we
hour.
only have an hour, yeah, and I know it's a pretty big agenda.
Right. So why don't we jump in? I think everybody knows who I am, but my name is Nate Gray. I work in the planning division for EDC and Neighborhood Strategies team. Been working on the planning engagement for this. Our hope today is to use this hour for the members of the task force to hear directly from the advisory groups. So we split this into 15 minutes of a quick presentation. Can you guys hear me? You can? Okay. John, I'm
Yes.
sorry. There might be an audio issue on your end. Just for process, just that raises a process point. We're recording these and we'll post them online afterwards. And then also we're taking notes throughout this. So we will make sure that we share those notes and we answer any questions in the notes so that people who aren't here will have access to the same information. So let's jump to the next slide. I'm sorry about that. My internet cut out there. So this is a recap of what we have heard through the conversations of this advisory group. The first at the top is just to make sure that as we go forward with the planning effort, there's a clear connection between what we've heard in the community feedback and then the scenarios that are developed. And then as we're going through the master site and through the site planning and the master planning, there was a pretty clear feedback, particularly at the model tool exercise, that we're creating residential blocks that deprioritize vehicular traffic to the maximum extent possible. So we make sure that we have something that's focused on pedestrian safety, make sure that it's focused on thinking about negative externalities associated with any vehicular truck traffic. There's a lot of questions around the spine and how we're thinking about comprehensively about transportation. We talked about with the spine, are there options to be able to limit that to the southern portion of the site around the port and making sure that we have a pretty straightforward and plan for exits and entrances out of the port, which we think we have at this point, but we're certainly going to be continuing to tailor that. There was a conversation about alternative marginal pier and port configurations, and then making sure that we promote waterfront access, and a discussion about capping portions of the VQE trench for housing and open space, and thinking beyond the borders of BMT to think comprehensively about how to cap the trench. Understanding, and we tried to, I think, make clear that we are working at EDC under focus on the BMT site, but coordinating with like DOT on the work that they're doing with the capping of the trench. We talked a lot about housing and opportunities for housing and making sure that we're focused on affordable housing and the provision of affordable housing that is as deep as possible, and balancing the financial viability and making sure that we have a significant amount of affordable housing, and looking at alternative housing models. And also something that came up in other task force and other advisory group meetings was around things like workforce housing, housing for vulnerable populations, and then home ownership. And what are the ways that we can think creatively about home ownership? So before I go on to other material on the deck, I just want to take a second here and just for the advisory group, just to reflect if this is, did we get this right? And then any questions from task force members to advisory group members about what's been discussed so far. So maybe just take a few minutes here to talk about that. Amy, please.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that this AG did only meet twice, and the first time was really kind of introductions, and then the second
Mhm.
time was with the models. So, you know, a lot of those questions that we had in discussions, the task force should realize that this group has met twice under those conditions and not privy to the full amount of information that the task force has at this point. And just to clarify too, that tapping the trench is also about accessibility and having access again east-west to the waterfront and create that flow and to rejoin communities, not cut them off as the BQE has done. So just wanted to make those points of clarification.
Great.
The other thing I might add is, and it's not reflected here, but you know, the input from the NYCHA advisory group meeting and discussion, like I'm aware of conversation about preservations around preservation of Red Hook, you know, related to Red Hook East and West, and then potentially some conversation related to infill. While I know that that's not on the BMT site, I think that a lot of folks, when they think about community development and housing, aren't necessarily thinking just about the BMT site and how this conversation can and should take into account like larger needs or opportunities.
Yes, we agree with that. And there has been initial conversations with NYCHA about that. And something we've shared with the task force that we think we're hoping that there could be a positive outcome there. Amanda, you had your hand up. Assuming, Amy, you haven't had a chance to put your hand down, but
yeah. Sorry, I was having
Exactly.
I do want to add to this, and I know it's always like a delicate thing to mention, but because it has come up, I've heard it from Red Hook, we've heard it, we've talked about it when it comes to housing, like to the extent this is actually supposed to be reflecting our and enhancing our existing neighborhoods, concerns regarding contextual housing. I know, you know, in Red Hook, they've talked a lot about the height of the housing. I know that it's come up here and in these discussions. I'm being delicate about it because I know how easy it is to dismiss anybody who raises those kinds of comments or concerns, but to sit in this room and pretend like that's not important to the surrounding communities, I think would be a disservice. So while maybe not controlling the discussion, I think it's relevant to have here, you know, how important it is for the existing communities, you know, not to have incredibly high buildings that cut them off from the water even further, but like really across the entire corridor, and for it to be contextual. So I know that's like never a popular thing to say, but I think that it is something that we have to at least have as part of the discussion.
Well, it was stated.
And it's been brought up before, so, and it's not here on this.
Okay.
So I just
It was stated in the first meeting.
Right, yeah, so it was discussed.
yeah, so we'll make sure to update that. That's important. And for everybody, for folks that, just to bring everybody into, so they have the same information, we've definitely heard through the workshop 2 and the advisory group meetings and from the task force to make sure that we have appropriate contextual development throughout the in key parts of the site. And it came through very clearly when we were working with the model tool. And so that's to this very first bullet is something that we're working with our design team and our planning team to make sure that's reflected. And hopefully you'll see some of that today when we go through some of the images that have been shown to the task force. Rebecca, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm on the road, so apologies if it's a little loud. I think I also just wanted to raise something from the task force meetings, which is that it feels kind of like the underlying assumption that all the housing breakdown is going to be 75% market rate, 25% affordable. It feels like we haven't been able to move off of that core assumption, despite feedback that that's not popular. So I kind of just wanted to raise that. And I also was wondering if the 80% and below AMI here was based on AG feedback, because I think when we were discussing the little that we're able to have affordable, it was 60% and below. So could you clarify that, please?
Sure. This was reflecting the conversation that I remember we had in the Red Room during the model tool. There was a portion when we started to talk about the affordable housing profile, and then we started to talk about AMIs that have been developed across the city. And then there was a portion, I think, Michelle, you had started to bring up and talk about some of the work that NYU had done looking at the housing provision and the deep levels of affordability that are needed. So it's reflective of that conversation, Rebecca. But we could be more specific, and we could be more specific in the language because the intention is to capture what we've discussed.
Okay, thanks. And then, yeah, is the presentation that's to come still rooted in a 75-25 model of market rate affordable, or have there been alternates that have been crafted for this advisory group?
Yes, this is still working with the assumption of what we've talked about previously. Yep.
Okay. Is there any sense that you
I'm not sure about that. Sorry, this is Amy. Rebecca, I'm not sure that we were told that it was going to be definitely MIH at this point when we were discussing, because we did have a robust discussion around the different levels of affordable housing. And then also it was asked for by AG members to have specifically for elderly populations and populations at risk. I think Nate mentions that it was said in other groups, but I don't see it on this.
It definitely been broadly talked about that it was going to like potentially mirror MIH option 1, which is 25% of the overall units are affordable, with an MIH option 1 is an average of 60% of AMI.
That's correct.
I think we have to like balance like what we know the need is and where the need is greatest with how to fund the port and not necessarily relying entirely on housing to do it. At least that's my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's the perspective that's been shared a lot in the task force. So that's kind of why I was wondering if, given that there's been significant pushback on the 75% market rate, if in preparation for this meeting, that's housing specific, if any alternative models were proposed that increases that affordability percentage.
Assembly member, you had your hand up next. Can you hear us? Assembly member Martinez? Circle back to her. John, you had your hand up next. Can you hear us, John? John, unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. I got the phone and everything.
Oh,
Now
we can hear you now.
I know.
We can hear you now.
All right. I just want to say that if this has been covered already, because I got on late because I couldn't get this to figure out how to work this. But anyway, this started out as the harbor of the future. Now it's all the talk is housing. And for the first like 2 months, it was mostly about harbor of the future and how we were going to build that or whatever. I feel like we're choking it. A lot of people in the community feel like you're choking it, like you're not giving it the space that it needs to really thrive. The BQE is something that definitely needs to be on the table. It's a block away, right? It's the trucks from there are gonna go on the BQE. The BQE is falling apart. I don't even know why we're doing this before we figure out what we're gonna end up doing with the BQE. And I was at a meeting last night where the good folks over at the other side of Red Hook put together. A large majority didn't even know this was going on. They didn't even know about it. And that's not our job. That's your guys' job. That's WXY, that's EDC's job or whatever to get this out. Have you guys ever even put up a poster? Because not everybody's on social media. Not everybody's on the internet. Have you guys even put up one physical poster in the neighborhoods? Have you guys gone to the churches and stuff like that to talk to the people there? I don't know, because these people didn't know anything about it. And so to be this close to the end, supposedly, and nobody, half the neighborhood doesn't even know what's going on yet, is crazy. It's really, 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 really crazy. So I mean, I don't even know. And then once people find out about the whole GPP in Europe, they're upset about that because it should have been a Europe. I'm gonna keep saying it to the day I die. I think this thing should be a Europe. City property supposed to go through a city process. So I just wanted to say that, and just if you guys would know the frustrations that's in these neighborhoods, because you guys aren't walking through these neighborhoods, aren't talking to people out here. You know, we're in a bubble here. Whoever's, you know, involved in this is involved, but there's a whole other, and people are really irate at what's going on. You just guys don't know about it because you don't want to have a town hall or whatever. But these people are really, really, really upset with what's going on. And once they even find out what is exactly going on, because a lot of them don't even know.
So John, I'll take the middle part first on the outreach and the engagement. Before the previous workshops, we had been working with Green City Forest literally to go door to door in the Red Hook houses, and we have been down the main streets in the neighborhoods, Columbia Street, Van Brunt, and other corridors to hand out flyers before every time we did a workshop. We've had, including today, have had small group discussions with folks in Red Hook. We had one today that was entirely in Mandarin. We're doing another one next week that's in Spanish. We've had site tours and focus groups with NYCHA through the Tenants Association. So we're making every effort we possibly can because it's something we heard at the beginning that we needed to do. We certainly have heard it from you. And so we're making an effort to do that, as well as holding workshops including the first one in Red Hook, as well as having all of the material available down at the Red Hook Arts Project. So we're trying as best as we can, and we're going to continue to do that.
Okay, let me tell you, you failed miserably because nothing happens in the Columbia waterfront without me knowing about it. And I have not seen one physical flyer. I have never seen. I would love for you to send me that flyer so I can see what it even looks like.
We will do it. We will happily do it.
I have never seen a physical flyer. And I'm telling you that those people last night, the majority had no idea that this was even really going on. So I don't know where you're knocking. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know who's doing it, but it's not, you're missing the mark. Absolutely.
Okay, we can, I want to make sure we give space for a lot of people to talk. I don't want to debate it now, John. We certainly can do better, and I appreciate the offer to send the flyer out, and we will give you that before our next workshops, because we want as many people to come. So we're using as many different techniques as we can and trying to reach as many people. That's what we want to do. Assembly member, have you been able to, can you hear us and unmute? I want to make sure we get to your question. Carly, you had your hand up. I want
to. Sure. And feel free to cut me off if someone else is able to jump in and unmute. I was also at the meeting last night, and I thought this would probably be the best AG to bring up similar concerns. And just to validate what John was just saying, the process has been too self-selecting. So going door to door and asking people to come to a meeting is still a self-selecting population from just a research perspective. I think some of the other things that we heard is that there hasn't been a real collection of community needs. And I think this echoes what Michelle was just saying, that community needs outside of this port need to be started with as a baseline. I think that's part of what we were hearing. We also heard that all of these conversations that are being had with WXY or with EDC are siloed, and there's an inability for there to be the vision to be building across them. And I think as we see on this slide here, there's not a very clear connection between the information that's been given by the community at all levels and the output of the scenarios we've been given. So with that, I will say that I have heard a formal request for a participatory action research project. And so I just want to share that that request has come up from the community because of the lacks that they're experiencing to date. I shared that with this AG, just so that you're aware of it. I was asked to share that, and I'm sharing that now. The other question I have, which is just a factual one, I'll put in the chat and it can be answered offline.
Okay, great. Why don't we go through the remaining? I want to quickly go through the slides and then we can continue the conversation. So related to the first point about how we were thinking about creative block typologies, the planning team is using these 6 different, I guess you could say, lenses, or thinking about ways in which to think about how we can make sure that this is a place that's centered on pedestrians and is in the fabric of the neighborhood. So the streets should feel like they're part of the neighborhood and be integrated. Parts of these ideally are car-free, and that we have a very strong relationship between the commercial corridors and the buildings. So active ground floors, transparent buildings, active uses at the ground floor. So we're additive to the community. Open space should be accessible and convenient, and make sure that we have community facilities integrated into the neighborhood. The last point here about making sure that our industrial character of the area is reinforced and supplemented and added to. So we're thinking a lot about what we've heard from the community about makerspace, industrial space, light industrial space that could be celebratory of the community, particularly Red Hook, and of be able to have, oh, we just went out of, there we go. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. So open space, we want to have a range of open space. The scenarios that we've talked about with the task force have at least 25 acres of open space spread throughout the site. That's destination waterfront open space at Pier 7, Piers 11, 12, and at the UPS site. It was very clear from the very beginning of this project that open space and waterfront access are a priority. So we think we're being responsive to that. A greenway that connects those in a way that we're sensitive to the community and also provides a multitude of transportation options. So that's what's represented here. Next slide, please. Okay, so talking about the different parts of the neighborhood and where we're thinking about, there's at its core, there's a modern maritime port that now is 60 acres, but that leaves portions of the site that could be for other uses. So around what we're calling BMT North in the area of Columbia Street, we want to make sure that we have community facilities as an anchor, potential hotel around Pier 7 and development around Pier 7. There's something that came up in the model tool exercises and came through in the outreaches, that that's a place where there is height. So there was a place that we could put some height. Make sure that we have neighborhood commercial uses along Columbia Street, which exists today, and integrate into the fabric of the neighborhood. So the maker space on this new spine street, that would be a neighborhood street facing the port, and have that relationship between the port and the industrial space. So that's what the design team is working on now, and getting feedback from the task force on that. Next slide, please. Going to the south, Pier 11, Pier 12 around the cruise terminal at UPS. What's come through very clearly in the outreach is this should be a destination. This should be a place that is more lively, engaging, inviting, in a way that it is additive to the neighborhood. So we've heard support for open space, maker space, using the Atlantic Basin as an asset to bring people to the waterfront. And that's what we're working towards. Have a strong maybe workforce presence, cultural presence, institutional presence around Pier 11, and certainly open space to the waterfront. We've heard very clearly about the Fort Defiance proposal to integrate resiliency, open space, culture, and celebrating history. And we want to be able to integrate all of that. So we think we've got some good ideas to do that. We're working with the task force through that, provide significant amount of open space, significant amounts of affordable housing and be able to bring that right to the neighborhood in a way that's context sensitive. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a shot of something we've shared with the task force looking north. You're here at Columbia and DeGraw. Go to the next slide, please. And this would be in the future. We think what this is showing is in response to the context across the street is a base height that matches what we have across the street at Columbia. To be able to not have a sheer tower that's right on Columbia Street, but to have something that's evocative of what is directly across the street. So fitting into that context, be able to then also use what, if you remember when we talked in the model tool, there's a DEP interceptor that runs through a portion of the site. While that limits what can be built over it, it presents an opportunity to provide open space that goes directly through this site. So that's what's shown here in the pedestrianized streets and open space, is that opportunity to be able to have something that's integrating into this community. Next slide, please. This is a close-up looking at that, going further into what we've called Interceptor Alley, showing the retail, the active use here on your right-hand side on the building that fronts on Columbia, as well as on the left-hand side, and providing a connection between these sites. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the spine, and I just want to say that we got a lot of feedback from the task force at the last meeting about the spine. And that's something that we're looking at and really looking at critically right now in response to what we heard at the task force. We certainly do not want to have something that induces a lot of traffic, that creates cut-throughs, that exacerbates problems at Atlantic Avenue today. And so we're taking the feedback that we got and providing a set of alternatives for and we're going to work with the task force on those. But at its core, the spine is a neighborhood street. It's something it's going to be integrated into the neighborhood and will be integrated into the fabric of the street network. So that's really that's at its base, that's what it is. And it's to be able to do that and have multiple functions to provide resiliency benefits, to address truck traffic in a way that's sensitive to the neighborhood and reduces the burden. Be able to then have a greenway that is wide and be able to provide more space, maybe a micro-mobility lane, and have resiliency benefits integrated into it to protect the upland area that today is not protected. So we think the spine is something that is really an important part of this project, and we're going to be working with our consultant team to respond to what the task force has brought up. Next slide. So this is an image of what the spine could look like. Again, this is really one lane in each direction. It's a neighborhood street, the way that there are many of like these throughout the neighborhood in the city. There's a micro-mobility lane, a greenway, a pedestrian path. Again, this is just a representative sketch. The feedback that we got from the task force is certainly going to be something that may change this, but in principle, what this is really an opportunity to integrate into the neighborhood and provide we think a significant amount of benefits. And next slide. So continuing south, we're now at Atlantic Basin. This is above Pier 12, looking to the north. Next slide, please. So this is something that we're tremendously excited about, and we think is really reflective of what we've heard from the community. Of people today are not able to access this. And we think that there's a real opportunity with a new cruise terminal at Pier 12 to bring people directly to the waterfront. So we would have a best-in-class cruise terminal that would have also a variety of other uses in it. Waterfront open space where people will be able to directly get around the basin, which is a tremendous asset, and then have other uses at Pier 11 that are not there today. And those could be community-oriented uses. That could be a place for workforce training. It could be a place for other maker spaces. We've learned a lot of lessons from other parts of the world about how they're bringing people to the waterfront and activating it. And we think Pier 12 and Pier 11 in the basin are really a great place to do that. So we're really excited about this one. We think it's going to be a really great signature part of the project. Next slide, please. Okay, so we heard a number of comments about the port and are there alternatives to the port. So what this represents is what we have evaluated and looked at to date of the scenarios going from a smaller 35-acre port up to the 60-acre port that we have heard from Moffett and Nickel is the best to be able to respond to the market demand and where is happening, the trends in the market. So given time, let's jump to the next slide just to go over what we've heard. So importantly, the marginal pier that's 1,700 feet long is able to handle both an international container vessel and a barge at the same time. This is going to be a really important site for the Blue Highway network, and be able to unload and then load a barge simultaneously is really important to that. 1,700 feet on this marginal pier allows for that. The 35-acre pier that we've shown previously has 900 linear feet on the wharf face, doesn't allow for that. Also, you're minimizing costs by limiting the amount of dredging by going farther out to the navigational channel. We have heard and we have spoken to a number of operators and relied on Moffett and Nickel of that there is a recommendation for this 1,700 feet rather than the 900 feet. It allows for program flexibility. We've talked about getting from 90,000 to 135,000 to probably up to 170,000 moves with this amount of space, while still being able to provide construction staging and flex maritime space at the same time. So all of that considered is to be able to have this as best positioning to respond to market demand. So replacing the finger piers with a marginal pier, provide enough space to have a container throughput that we no longer require the subsidy, and be able to provide enough space for other uses that would generate revenue and on top of the container revenue. So with that, I'll take a second. And there was a number of questions in the chat that I want to make sure I get to. Okay, so Amanda at the top, the portions of the open space adjacent to the spine, and is there active commercial in the Columbia separate from the residential? So the spine as it's currently contemplated would incorporate the greenway. It's roughly a mile long of open space. So we consider that greenway open space that's directly adjacent to the spine. And then the active commercial on Columbia is synonymous with, in this case, with a retail base. There could be other uses there, but what we've heard is that these shouldn't be dead zones. They should be places that have a use, and that is one that's additive to the community. So we're thinking now that it's a commercial space or retail space. There could be a school, maybe other community facility space, but it's places that people are going to, through their everyday lives. And then Carly, your question, for the housing that is included in the current scenarios proposed by EDC, is the affordable housing intended to be mixed into the same building as the luxury, or is intended to be a separate building? I would believe it would be mixed through the same building.
But it doesn't have to be. And I think that's part of what can be discussed.
Okay. Yeah, you know this much better than I do, Michelle. So I would.
Yeah. I mean, if it functions like MIH, it would be on site and it would be mixed throughout the building, but it doesn't have to be. It could be that, and then there could still be standalone 100% affordable housing buildings as well. Or the percent could be a different percent, like, because this is not going through ULURP, and John, I know we could litigate that question, but we're not going to, but it does allow greater flexibility in some ways to have a higher percentage or deep affordability than what MIH requires by going through GPP. We're not bound by MIH. They could view the MIH as inspiration, but without it being, shackling us to one approach. I know Amanda had questions too about height. Maybe it was Carly.
Yeah, there's two questions that I think were similar.
It was just when you were saying contextual to the buildings
Sure.
Across the street, you're showing what looks to me like the highest, like Columbia has quite a variation of buildings. There are like a few that are somewhat higher, but the vast majority aren't. It looks like what you've done is maybe it's just the rendering is matched the highest of the buildings in Columbia. Is that what you're considering contextual? I just wasn't sure.
Sure. So these are roughly
Not
6
really clear.
stories.
6?
So these
Okay.
are,
Yeah, that
so
wasn't
these are
clear.
roughly 6, but also just to
Okay.
take,
Yeah,
there's
that wasn't
another,
clear from the rendering.
sure. There's another question that Carly had about the number of stories. That has not been determined yet. What we're showing here is the design cue of something that we're making sure that we're being contextual to Columbia Street, and then going to work with the task force on a final recommendation around height and density. We're actively going to be, we're in active discussions about that, or with the planning team, and then we'd work with the task force on that.
You know, can I just say something in the middle of this? Thing to that.
Please.
Conceptual and fabric. I wish you would stop using. It seems like you've never come to the Columbia Street waterfront. You picked the highest building pretty much on the waterfront, and from that angle, it might look like. Have you been here? Have you seen that most of the homes here are little townhouses, like brownstones with like 3 floors, maybe 4? Like that's not typical. That's a brand new building, and that's not typical of the buildings here. The buildings directly across the street from where you're talking, like down the block, are small little 3-story buildings.
Well, what's the height of 63 Tiffany?
Well, that's a different. That was converted from a warehouse. That couldn't even happen afterwards. That was a conversion. That our block is the weirdest block.
I think the point, Nate, is there is going to be some pushback on the use of contextual. So
Okay.
I think we need to be open to how the community is seeing contextual. Also, you're talking about just along Columbia Street, but you're not talking about the height of the buildings closer to the working waterfront. And if we're talking 7 to 9,000 units, those are going to be some big buildings.
That's completely fair, Amy, and I don't want to, because I don't want to get out of my skis and show you something that we haven't, worked with the task force on yet. So these are plans that we're going to be working on the task force on, and showing to them. And I don't want to be able to get ahead of that discussion, because
as it's drawn right now, like with these renderings, how many units does this represent in this Columbia Street area, for instance, in that mixed use yellow bubble area?
Good question. This isn't representative of a number of units, but let me talk to the design team if they have an idea of what this represents, because it's intended to be evocative of the design, not of a number of units.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit what I'm like. I just put it in a comment, but when you look at this, there's sort of like a way that this is being talked about, like, oh, there's all of this great public space, and it's really exciting what we could do at Pier 11 and 12 and by the cruise terminal. And then, over Pier 7, and then in the middle, you just have this block of yellow right on Columbia that we don't have the numbers for. It also happens to be on one of the most congested streets closest to the BQA. So, it's a little bit of, just we've got this just block of yellow surrounded by your exciting opportunities, but that block of yellow is one of the biggest issues, and by one of our biggest transportation and congestion existing nightmares. So I just think we need to be mindful of that. We're not dumb people. We can talk about acres and acres and acres of great public access to the waterfront, but like, we've got the block of yellow and we haven't been given numbers or heights or anything to really understand what's happening there.
Understood. Well, I mean, what to turn for the AG task force members, what would be, let's talk about contextual. What do you, John, you brought up other sites. What are you thinking is something that's contextual?
I don't know, because I'm still looking at this slide. Like, do you realize that cars can't even really go up and down this block, that it takes like half an hour to get from one side to the other? So now you're going to block off a lane with trees, and you think adding 20 to 30,000 more people here and just adding another street on the other side and it's going to be okay? Like, are you guys insane? Like, it doesn't work now. And when you add another 20,000 people here and just put another little street over there and it looks cute with the trees and stuff, but is that going to work? How?
Um,
So this takes out a whole. Are those parked cars? So then that's the whole lane. All right, that's where the parked cars are. So then one lane going this way, one lane going that. And then those are what, bus lanes, the orange?
Yeah, I would just say, John, like the
So
thing
the
we
tractor
heard very
trailers and
similar.
everything. Excuse me. So the tractor trailers and everything and all the Amazon trucks from the last mile warehouse, are they going to use the orange or are they going to use that lane there?
The way we contemplating the spine is that it would be able to, that there would be, it would serve as a truck route, and that there would also be a for the port, a new entrance and exit by Hamilton Avenue and Hamilton and Bound to get trucks that are from the port directly to that. I understand what you're asking about last mile, but that we would get the last mile trucks and off of local streets onto this Conover Street, and then they would be able to quickly get at Bound to a truck route. There may be other deliveries here, but that would separate them off of Columbia Street so that we able to hopefully be able to speed up the buses that are now mixing with a number of other cars.
Okay.
I
And
want
then
Gabriel's had his hand up. I just want to make sure that since he hasn't asked something, that he's able to
Oh, no,
ask.
thanks, Nate. Just a clarification, when someone mentioned high rise, and it seems to me like the Columbia waterfront is basically, you are going for a high rise, but are you trying to stay below, like, is it a 75 feet range of a high rise? Is that a goal, or are you considering that is basically what's going to happen, is that there will be a high rise? In terms of just like calling a spade on that, is it above 75 feet or below?
There would be buildings that would be higher than 75 feet. Where we are in the process is to be able to work with the task force to make sure that work with them on the plan. They're voting on the plan. So right now, as it stands, we need to be able, process wise, is to work with them on those decisions while we are working towards, as we've maintained from the beginning, housing provides for financial viability. And
Right.
so there would, yeah. So
So
that
yeah,
was
they'll be
it.
during the 75 to 100 sort of range is in terms of that grouping. And then just in terms of the base, the terminal where the ferries are coming, and you're saying that's mostly like parks and things. Are there buildings in this indication, and are there some buildings that will have heights, like where the cruise terminals are, or is that considered now that there won't be? I guess what means low when you're talking about like low density? How high is that?
So the final plan on density is still to be determined. What I was trying to describe is that given a site of this scale, there's going to be various heights, right? So there's the opportunity to have, like what we're representing here, on something that is akin to, in a height that's akin to what's on Columbia Street, while still having enough block to then be able to move taller buildings away from Columbia Street and onto the Spine Road. So that's what this is intended to do. So we can be sensitive to what's happening on Columbia Street while still providing height. And then in it around Pier 11 and around Pier 12, like those are, this is just to show what could be, what like programmatically what our intent is to be able to do. The decisions around height and all of that, again, is something that we're going to be working with the task force on.
Thanks.
Michelle, you had your hand up next.
So first off, I just want to state, like, I'm probably more comfortable personally with height and density than a number of people on this call. I do think it has to be reasonable for the location. And to me, the reasons to have height and density are about deepening affordability, increasing the percent of affordable housing, about actually creating more open space. If you have more height, then you have the potential for more open space. right? Or to make the whole thing more financially viable without relying exclusively on housing as the source of financing for this thing, because I just don't think that is, I don't think that's the way to go. I think, there are trade-offs inherent in all of these things, and we just have to find like the right balance based on like the multitude of goals that we're trying to reach. Obviously, Fifth Avenue Committee did lots of organizing and advocacy for the Gowanus area-wide rezoning, which authorized and approved 8,500 units over an 82 block area that is within walking distance of one of, one of the third largest subway hub in the city. So like, I do think we need to take into account, like, what are the subway and transit connections in this area? And if we don't want a car dependent use area, because we already know the traffic, that I do think we need to like, it just like, it is a different, physically laid out differently than other neighborhoods, and access to transit is very different. And so I think that has to be a consideration about where we go with density in the end, or else we're going to have impacts that none of us are going to want. The quality of life will not be good.
I want to go back to the assembly member who was able to put their hand down, but then wasn't able to speak earlier. Assembly member, were you able to fix the issue?
Yes, thank you. I just want to reiterate that there has been no vote on housing. The continued conversation about the housing is very, very, it's dividing the community. And there's not been enough outreach. There's not enough people at the table. I'm getting frustrated with these renderings and these buildings when we haven't agreed to it. And so I'm just really concerned about the project, and I want to make sure that everyone is being heard. Thank you.
I know we only have a few more minutes, and I just want to say this. So I'm going to be sending out a flyer to folks. So Fifth Avenue Committee, because we know there like needs to be deeper conversation, and there's like differing understanding about like what is affordable housing and what does it mean and what's the need in the neighborhood and all those things. We are going to be hosting a workshop actually at Carroll Gardens Association on the 26th, which I'll send a flyer out. We're going to ask people to RSVP. So there'll be an opportunity to have like some deeper conversations about some of this, like outside of whatever is hosted by EDC as well.
Great.
With all due respect, those meetings are about wanting to build affordable housing, unless we're talking about affordable housing for deeply needing people. So 80% AMI is way too high. And the affordable housing that the city's been building has been gentrifying our communities.
And I think we've been told by EDC that if we want affordable housing and deeply affordable housing, that we're going to have to accept more market rate housing. So this is a problem as well.
And that's the only conversation that EDC seems to want to have, which is why we're having such a problem that keeps being brought up here about the community not participating. And that's why so many people are mad. And this continues to be EDC's problem, that there isn't transparency and there isn't trust.
Or respectfully, I think the issue is also like on the task force, we've voiced this multiple times, and it just feels like EDC is just like barreling forward regardless of that feedback. So even beyond the process issues of larger community disengagement based on this particular process, I won't get into that because it's what we've chosen, but like it doesn't seem to matter what feedback has been given about the 75% market rate on public land to fund the port. Like it just feels like that's been mentioned so many times, and yet that is just like a given that will not be budged from. And it's becoming really not even disheartening, just like, yeah, I'll leave it at disheartening.
Gabriel, I see your hand up, but I just want to jump in for a second, if you don't mind. Thank you for saying that, Rebecca. I also want to say that, Nate, I respect your job and what you do, and that you need to stick to the script. But I think when John was expressing the issues around the spine and some of the road concepts, you said, well, we've already heard it. but he hasn't heard it. He wasn't in the task force meeting.
Yes, that's
And
fair.
it's important for him to express those things and to back up some of the task force members who are bringing these things up. But my issue, to dovetail off of Rebecca, is that when you say, well, we're taking this back to our consultants, and we're going to look at this, but you lay out that your goals are still the same goals, is where there's a problem, because inherently the issue here is in your goals. Like with DOT, I'll just say it, their goals were throughput, not to deal with the congestion. And
Mhm.
so we were given always solutions that didn't meet the needs of the community. So I bring this forward to say, please just deeply listen to the feedback that you're getting and maybe look at how some of those goals might be revised or modified to meet maybe some of your needs, but also to reflect what the community and other
Sure.
stakeholders are bringing forward.
Sure. I don't want to minimize anything like, John, my intention was not to minimize anything, around the spine or anything. My intention was just to be transparent that the task force, when we presented this, gave us a considerable amount of feedback on the spine, and that we want to make sure that we are working with our consultant team to be responsive to that feedback. So it's not to blow past that.
Well,
And then on the goals, I think we've tried to be very clear from the beginning that the goals here are to be able to have a functioning maritime port, and then to have other uses on the site that respond to what the community has brought up and asked for, while maintaining a financially viable project. We're trying to balance all of those things, Amy, and be able to be responsive to that. And what we're showing here is where we are at this point of time, and that maritime is core to this project. The 60-acre port is what from our maritime experts and the conversations we've had with port operators is responsive to that, both in its design and in its size. And then that allows for other space that could be for community amenities and community uses. So that's what our goals are, as from, I think we've been transparent about that from the beginning.
I mean, but have
So
you considered that the community has goals too?
let's talk about it right now, John.
The community has
I,
goals.
I have, we
It's
do,
go
we
back
totally
to the
consider that, to
page.
say yes.
Go back to the slide where it says what we heard, because I don't think you have listed. We heard no luxury towers, and that's like the main thing that people have said from like day one. Like, we don't want. I just went across the Brooklyn Bridge, right? I was on an Uber. I was at a city hall at a rally, and I came across, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, what is this going to look like? 15 years, and it's not. It's going to be crazy. It's just going to be a big wall of buildings. And that's what nobody wants. That's going to be what Brooklyn, that's going to be people's introduction to Brooklyn. And that's what people don't want in this area.
Sure.
And when you started off with Harbor of the Future, one of that, and some mixed use housing. Now it's mixed use housing first, and then the Harbor of the Future. Like, we barely even talk about what the Harbor of the Future is going to look like. The last memo I saw from Kimball to the task force, that said that I think the state is giving $15 million. That's ridiculous. That's not money. That's not even money for a project like this. Are we even still going to get the 165? Do you have assurances on that? I'm pretty sure we're not going to get that. I'm pretty sure we're not even going to get it. Unless you
We
put
are working on the
a Trump
assumption that we're
tower
going
in the
to get
middle
it.
of it.
We're continuing to make progress.
Unless you put a Trump tower in the middle of it, I don't think you're going to get it. So now, what's the big rush? What's the whole rush right now? Like, because that was the rush. The rush was the new administration. Then the rush was, we're going to lose the money. 165 for a project like this, that's not even money. Because when the governor wanted a stadium, right, she pulled out $185 million. When she wanted, the other thing, let's say just take the jail in Chinatown right now. How much are we spending on that? You know what I'm saying? It's like, so like, there's money. Don't tell me that there's only 165 and we're gonna die on this, because there's money and we have to just go get it. And if this is not the perfect time for this project, then maybe it's not the perfect time right now. It's just, I'm sad. You shouldn't have did it this way. You should have did it the right way. And the right way would have been a Europe, and would have been to involve the community the right way, the way it should have been. And that's my standard. That's most people in the community. In the beginning, what I was saying is, I want whatever the community wants. I've heard them now. And what you're saying is not what they want. You keep saying, well, we heard the community, and then we came out with something totally opposite from what they want. Here it is, the fabric. That's not the fabric. That's a whole different community that you're going to build over there. That's not this community. And I'll land there.
Thanks, John. I want to, we've got 3 minutes, and if there's anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak, I want to make sure that they're it's either a task force member or advisory group member, if there's somebody who hasn't had a chance to speak, if they want to add their voice. All right, so we'll go Carly.
Thanks. I just want to echo what I'm hearing from some of the other task force members. And just put a finer point on it. You know, Nate, when you say the task force will decide this and the task force will decide that, I think that has not been the experience of the task force to date. There's not a lot of agency there, not a lot of reflection of requests or input to date. And so when you say that to external groups, I get a little bit nervous because it seems to suggest that the task force has a lot of agency. And I think the task force, as you've been hearing from a number of us today, are not feeling that agency with regard to those decisions. I also think that there's a lot of reasons to be very concerned from a risk perspective in this large housing funding model. And I think that if you were listening, you would be able to find that there's a lot of other financial longer term, different, diverse models of financing that we could be exploring here. And by not moving forward with that, I think we're going to be very stuck. If not now, we're going to be stuck later. And so I'd really suggest that that the groups start taking seriously some of the other financial mechanisms and phased approaches that could be used here to avert some of those risks that are real risks that I don't think are being taken very seriously.
Michelle.
I think part of it is we're like, although this is a 122 acre, piece of land, if you will, it's finite, and like the needs of the community go beyond that 122 acres. So I think, I really do think we should think about where are other areas, close to the community that can help meet some of the needs that we're talking about, even if that, strains this financing model, which we all know needs to be evolved and updated anyway because of its heavy reliance just on housing. So I think that's an important piece here. Like, I keep thinking about Red Hook. I keep thinking about NYCHA infill and NYCHA preservation. I keep thinking about projects like where John lives, like 63 Tiffany, that needs to be preserved as affordable housing, that are important resources today, and where we need to think more broadly than just what happens on the 122 acres, because so much of what we're talking about is trying to solve like a lot of community needs in this one area, and it's too limited. So that I think is a really important piece. And then I just want to lift up, folks have been asking in the chat about Portside, so I don't know if anybody has a quick update about that.
There's others from the EDC team. I don't have an update. Not to say that I don't have an update on it because I don't have the relevant information. There's others from the EDC team that do. Otherwise, we'll get you an answer in writing. Hearing none, I think Michelle we should respond in writing to that with you because I don't have the appropriate information.
Okay, I'm going to send that flyer out to folks. Hopefully people can come. For those who want to continue the conversation, we will.
Yeah, just to end on something, just first with a thanks. We really appreciate everybody has taken a lot of time. So I appreciate that. And then second, just to go back to what John brought up earlier, we want as many people to come to these meetings as possible. And we're relying on a variety of methods, and certainly would have, when we produce a flyer, if you want to, for the folks who are on the advisory group and the task force, please send it as wide as you possibly can so we can have as many people out there. We definitely want them there, and we appreciate it. And then we're having an advisory all hands meeting for all of the advisory groups to get together, so we have the same amount of information amongst everybody. And we'll do that next week. So thank you, everybody. We've taken notes. We'll respond on with answers to all the questions. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, take care.
Thank you.
Alexa, bedroom 2, light off. Esos blancos me tienen un odio a mí. Todo eso de la ciudad y todo eso que están metiendo cuento ahí. Yo soy el único uno de los únicos que me paro ahí, le digo de todo, le digo lo que. Eso del Columbia Sea Waterfront. Yo creo que por eso es que me están ofreciendo esos apartamentos, ¿viste? Porque eso todo está conectado. Ellos me están ofreciendo esos apartamentos como para que yo me vuelva contento y me mude para otro lado y deje la jodedera aquí. Porque ellos no saben que aunque yo me fuera, yo siguiera jodiendo aquí. Algo que no me gusta lo que ellos hacen. ¿Cómo? Sí. Ya, ahora mismo. Ellos son unos mierdas. Ese miri debía de haber durado 2 o 3 horas. Pero para ellos hacerlo lo más rápido posible, para decir que lo hicieron y ya. Y para abajo buscar a Jaden ahora. Yo porque ya se está acabando el día, aunque tengo que hacer un Zoom ahorita. A las 6:00 No, uno a las 5 y después otro a las 6:00 para que tú veas. Pero si yo tuviera que seguir caminando, yo creo que yo me tomara una pastilla de esa de la fuerte, pero como ya lo que queda ya hoy, ya nada más es, coño, qué clase de dolor yo tengo en estos muslos. Cada paso que tomo me duele. ¿Cómo? No, está bien.